Origen, who was the Alexandrian church father, who lived between 185 and 254 AD, taught that the days in the Genesis account were allegorical, not literal. Augustine, who lived between 354 and 430 AD, also followed the allegorical interpretation. The Greeks believed that God to be outside of time, and therefore that would be the only way to interpret the Genesis account. The 24-hour days of creation literal interpretation came about in the 16th century when Protestant reformers such as Martin Luther rejected the idea that human church authorities, the Pope, priests, are required for interpreting Scripture. Sola Scriptura not only made Scripture itself the main measure by which any spiritual revelation must be measured, it also adopted the more literal interpretation of Scripture. You don't need a biblical scholar to understand the context, symbolism, and cultural references of Scripture if you just take it at face value. It says a day, it means a day. In the 1700s, when Charles Lyell's work Principles of Geology was published, a more concordist approach to Scripture was taken by many biblical scholars of the time. A concordist being someone who believes in old earth creationism. A couple of more well-known concordists were Benjamin Stillman, who endorsed Galileo's understanding of the Bible, and Stillman's student, Edward Hitchcock, a geologist who was also a concordist. He was a professor of both geology and natural theology and wrote a textbook called Elementary Geology. There are many modern-day concordists that will accept revelation from many sources, including Scripture and science. I would say they follow more of a prima scriptura position, that Scripture is our primary source of revelation, but not the only one. The astrophysicist Dr. Hugh has given a lot of lectures on the subject, and I will link some in the description below. 2 Peter 3:8 says, "But beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing, that one day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is as one day." Time is relative to the perspective of the observer. If God is the only observer in the Genesis account, and he moves instantaneously outside of time, how would his days equate to ours? They would not physically be equal. A day and a night to a man is measured by the earth's rotation. God does not live within the same boundaries. But that is not the point of the Genesis account. The point it makes is metaphorical. Man's work week should mirror God's work week, with a day of rest at the end. Many people believe that we are still living in the seventh day, the day of God's rest. If all of God's creation was finished, that we live in the day of rest, that could explain why in the miracles of Jesus, he never created anything out of thin air. He used mud and spit to heal the blind man. He used loaves and fishes to multiply them. He turned water into wine, etc. Even while fasting in the desert, the devil himself tempted Jesus to turn rocks into bread. He didn't tempt Jesus to create bread out of nothing. If you thought this was interesting, hit the like button, comment below, and subscribe. Thanks, I appreciate it.